I'm David, this is Brian. I want to know how many of you are raising children right now? Oh, good. We can tell you stuff to scare the heck out of you. I don't want to do that because my wife reminded me that how much fun it was to raise our 3 kids, and you need to keep that in mind when you're doing all this stuff. I was blessed by spending 40 years working with adolescents who were using chemicals, getting in trouble, and I will tell you, I loved every minute of it. Anyway, we're going to talk because I don't like to talk to groups.
Well, Dave, thanks. We're excited to hear about your expertise with children and chemicals, but maybe before we get into that, you can just kind of share with us what it was that kind of ignited your passion long ago to work with youth and how you got into that.
I worked at a camp for delinquent kids out of institutions as a 19-year-old, and that progressed into going from a civil engineer to I decided that was not my field. I met my wife, who was going to be a teacher, and I decided I wanted a field working with kids, and I spent 40 years doing that, and like I said, I loved it.
As a probation officer and a youth treatment counselor, what were the kind of common sets of circumstances that children would come to you with? What was kind of, what shape or position were they in when they came to you generally? It
was kind of different. With probation, about 80% of the kids I saw were just your children. They went out and did something stupid. They got in trouble, they got cited by the police, they came in and saw us, we saw them for 2 or 3 months, and they left. We supervised their probation. The other 20% had lots of things going on in their lives that were basically destroying who they were. And those kids, a lot of them were addicted to chemicals or abusing chemicals. Their families were struggling, having a real difficult time with things. In 2000, my wife and I moved to Washington, and we lived near Seattle, and I became an adolescent drug counselor. I was in Bozeman as a probation officer. And when I changed occupations, basically, I ended up working with the exact same kids. That 20% that I saw as a probation officer, I was seeing every day, probably 5 hours every week, spending time working on addiction issues.
And just in the past, I know we've talked about some of the great successes you've had with kids. What is the one reason you would say you were able to connect so well with kids and be able to have such an impact on changing them?
I think it's probably the same reason it takes to be a good parent, and that's basically building rapport, building a relationship. God has blessed me with the ability to talk with teenagers, and even retired, I can do that to the point that it takes very little time to build a relationship, and I work hard at doing that, and the same thing I did with my kids. And that relationship allowed me to teach them, and in teaching them, there's no magic in how to get off chemicals, but you need to learn, and you need to learn the negative consequences of that, and that's basically what I was able to teach them.
So it sounds like relationship is kind of key to affecting that change. How can you go about building that relationship, either in the work that you did or just as a parent? What are some of the keys to developing that relationship?
I think as a parent, the most important thing you can do is build a relationship where you have communication that works. The biggest part a parent can do in that communication role is set an example. If you're not setting the right example, your children are going to look at that, they're going to follow you, or they're not, one or the other. But in setting an example, you have more power as a parent to influence your child than all the other issues, all the other things out there. Their peers, their music, internet, anything out there, you can influence your children. And by communicating with them that example, by talking to them about things, by spending time with them, all the ways you bond with your children, if you can do that at an early age, by the time they hit teen years, you're going to be able to communicate with them, you're going to be able to talk to them, you're going to be able to share with them what the world's like, and you're going to be able to protect them basically from what's out there. And my wife and I say my wife and I, she probably did more of this than I did, but bottom line, we have 3 very healthy children. They're 42, 40, and 38, but they're still my kids. And we have 5 grandchildren, and they're all doing well. And they're doing well not because Connie and I did such a great job, but we not only included them in our life, we included them in other healthy adults' lives. And from the time they were old enough to get into youth group, we had them in youth groups. They were in soccer or football or whatever. Those all helped. But I don't see keeping your kids busy 24/7 doing other things helps raise kids. I see it as building that relationship with your family and with those people closest to you. That's how you raise healthy kids. A lot of parents I see get their kids wrapped up in all sorts of activities. That can help, but the relationship is much more important than that. His job is also to keep me on track. I kind of get out there somewhere.
This is great. As a parent, I've got two really small kids, 2 and 4, and this has kind of just prompted some thoughts in my mind as to what's an appropriate age to start talking about with your children. Start talking to your children, about substances and chemicals and some of the things that they might be pressured to experiment with in school. What is, in your mind, what's an appropriate age to begin that discussion, and how do you start that discussion?
It's not 12, it's not 15, it's when they ask you. That can be 5. That can be any age where they start getting curious about things. They see somebody smoking a cigarette. You talk to them about that. You talk to them about why that person might smoke, why that person continues to smoke. You tell them the downside of that. You talk to them. They see all sorts of stuff on TV, wherever, that shows them this glorified sense of what it's like to smoke. That's not so much anymore, but other things the same way. Drinking is a good example. I like to watch TV and watch cop shows, and almost every one of them ends with somebody having a drink. That sends a real clear message out there. When kids see things like that and they ask you as a parent, talk to them. You don't tell them all the facts the first day they ask you, but during their life, you need to let them know why we shouldn't smoke marijuana, why we shouldn't drink. And I don't mean drink as an adult, a healthy adult. You're allowed to drink. You're not allowed to go out and get drunk at a football game. That's not what healthy adults do. Lots of adults do that. Lots of parents do that. But that's where the example comes back. I think in showing your kids what it's like to be a healthy person, chemical-free person, you don't get intoxicated on anything. And I think that's critical. Did I answer your question?
That does. What are some of the consequences you would highlight with your kids about the impacts or the results of getting into chemicals, and either from an experimentation level or even to the point of abuse or addiction? What are some of those consequences?
I think the first thing that abusing chemicals, and let me define what that means. Using means you use a chemical, you don't get intoxicated, you don't get high, you walk away from it. Abuse means you're using a chemical, and chemical, alcohol, drugs, doesn't matter. Abusing a chemical means it's causing problems in your life, and you keep using it, but you finally get to a point where you say, I got to get out of this. Addiction is where you're using it's causing problems in your life, and all of a sudden it's controlling your life. Bottom line, consequences are relationships. The first thing you hurt when you abuse or are addicted to chemicals is you lose relationships. Next thing is, as an adolescent, you might start losing friends. You start school no longer is a priority, if it ever was. It never was for me, but I graduated. Things in your life that were important are no longer important, because when you start abusing chemicals and when you started getting addicted to chemicals, those are what's important. And the friends that you now have are friends that are using. The friends that you used to have that are playing football, they're still playing football, and you're over here doing this drug. I've had thousands of kids over the years and parents tell me why marijuana is okay, because it really doesn't hurt me. It's a natural drug, all this stuff. And what I tell them is, it's going to screw over your relationships just as bad, if not worse, than alcohol does. And alcohol is the worst drug we have in this nation for relationships. It's hurt more families than all the other drugs combined. Tobacco is the most costly because it kills more people and it causes more physical damage, but alcohol messes over relationships. So bottom line, those are the consequences of it.
Can you give us some perspective on just ages that you dealt with, and maybe some statistics about, how many kids in middle school or elementary school or even high school are out there experimenting with illegal substances or even addicted to them?
There's no age that, from middle school on up, there's no age they're not using. Nationwide, about 30%, 35% of our kids out there are using on some kind of regular basis. That might be once a month, it might be once a week, it might be every day. That's a lot of kids. But the other side of that is 60 to 70% of the kids aren't using at all. And that's a real good thing to remember. Of the 100% of the kids I worked on probation, only 20% were coming back time and time again. The other 80% got in trouble. They ran into the wall that was called a probation officer. They backed off and they changed.
So about 30 to 35% of kids, middle school, high school, have either experimented or are using on a regular basis?
Yes, they're not experimenting. More kids experiment than 30%. But most kids, they experiment and they stop. The ones I worked with and spent all my time with, that didn't happen. There was a benefit to using. They used, they got a benefit out of it, they felt better, they forgot all the problems they were having over here, they had new friends, they could socialize. I drank as a late teenager because that's how I socialized. I won't tell you the story about meeting my wife. I was going to.
Sounds good.
I think she's here, so I can't do that.
We'll find you during the break.
Drinking was how I socialized, and that's how I kind of got out of the not being able to talk to other human beings. I had a lot of relatives, but they didn't count.
For parents who are kind of navigating that, they've got kids in middle school and high school, what are some principles you'd give them about how to kind of identify, maybe some early signs that their kids are starting to use some substances? How do you kind of detect that, and how do you open your children up to some conversations about that?
The most important thing, like I said, is relationship. If you have a relationship and you're talking to your kids and you're spending time with them, you need to recognize when they start talking about using. They start talking about, well, my friend Jimmy he said they had a party at the house the other night. One of my friends said his mother let him use marijuana this weekend. When you start hearing things about drugs and alcohol coming from your kids, when they ask you about why is it illegal to smoke pot, why can't I drink? You can. And when they start asking those questions, you need to start spending more time talking about those issues. If you can do that, you're going to spot kids who experiment and who are using every now and then. There's a lot of signs of kids who are abusing chemicals. They change friends. They start sliding in school. They start getting more moody. These are all things that adolescents do. The crazy thing about adolescents is, not crazy, the normal thing about adolescent things is they're crazy. Bottom line, they have a real difficult time with life, and they're trying to break away from you as parents, and that's their job. Their job is to become independent. Their job is to move on with life. And in that process, they have a lot of emotional things that happen in their lives that allow them to pull away, but also it's kind of scary as parents. You watch them go through these things, and you want to help them through. I swore I wasn't going to say this, but our daughter quit talking to us for a significant period of time. But she was talking to other healthy adults in the process. She was talking to youth leaders. She was talking to other people. We thought that was terrible because she quit talking to us. It was just who she was. We now have as good a relationship as any parent does with her. But for quite 6 months of her life, she talked to us, but it wasn't a very nice tone. And I wasn't a very nice parent, so it was mutual. I learned to parent as I went along. We had foster kids. We raised 3 kids. I was a probation officer. My wife was a teacher. There was no magic in what you could do. We read Dobson frontwards and backwards and got nothing out of that book. I mean, it's tough being a parent, but it's a blessing, total blessing being a parent. These are some websites. That first one's kind of cool. It's called drugabuse.gov family checkup. You can actually go on as parents and run through. It gives clues about what to look for. It gives ways to talk to your kids. It gives actual conversations. Shows you how to do that. It was a really cool website. The Helen Youth Crisis Organization, great place to go to if you're starting to have problems with your kids, if you don't know what to do.
Yeah, let me just ask you this.
Yes.
If you're a parent and you found yourself in a situation where, your kid is using or experimenting and you think it's gotten to the point of unhealthy and you as a parent don't know what to do, what advice would you give a parent to help them intervene in that situation?
Number 1, educate yourself. You need to know what you're talking about when you're talking to your kids. There's thousands of ways to do that on the internet. Number 2, go to a professional, either a mental health counselor or a drug counselor or someone in the field, and talk to them about, what do I do now? There's no magic in dealing with addiction. For 14, 15 years that I did that, I educated. I didn't change kids. I told them the downside of using drugs. We just hit red. I think you took some of our time. Anyway.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.